Hey everyone, so we are just flipping ahead here, see what we're looking at for the rest of the chapter. So we ended up with talking about EKGs, and the next little segment I want to talk to you about is irregular EKGs and how EKGs can be used as diagnostics. So you see that here on page 683, what different EKG patterns would look like in different cases. So you need to know what all the parts of the EKG are, the P wave, the T wave, right, QRS, etc. So you need to understand what those things represent. And again, they're representing depolarization and repolarizations, not the contractions. The contractions are implied. But I don't think I'm going to have you draw any because everything's online. In a face-to-face class, I do have you draw them. But I may have an image of one, and you might have to give like a sample diagnostic. Or I might say, you know, Jamie's EKG shows what? No P waves before the QRS. So what might that represent? Well, no P waves. P waves are atrial depolarization, so there might not be any atrial contractions. So she might have a problem with her SA node, right? Or, you know, I'm just kind of making that up. But as long as your explanation is plausible, that's all that matters. You don't have to be a clinician to diagnose in this class. It's all just plausibility and be able to explain why you think that that is the plausible answer. Well, I think it's plausible because if there's no P waves, that means the atria aren't depolarizing. If the atria aren't depolarizing, then they might not be getting the signal from the SA node, something like that. So there's a bunch of different scenarios there on page 683 for you just to look at and think about and contemplate how they make sense. 684 has a nice chart showing major arrhythmias that take place in the heart. And some of these come and go throughout people's lives. Some of them are symptoms, or what are they? Not symptoms, but they're things that you suffer from when you're on different medications. I can't think of the word. But yeah, side effects. Some of them are side effects of other medications and things like that. So it is important to be aware of what these are when evaluating risks for procedures and prescriptions and so on and so forth. Cardiac cycle is a fun one. I get kind of excited for it because it's cool. And it's basically all summarized. You get these big charts here. It's a lot of words, a lot of vocab. Everything in A&P is vocab heavy. But where all the magic happens is on page 688 and 689. So 688 is the actual picture of the heart and what it's doing. What I would do here is, if you could copy it or redraw it. I love drawing. Drawing's awesome because it works the other side of your brain, right? You have the logical side and the artistic side. If you stretch yourself and try to do something that puts you out of your comfort zone like that, you're going to remember it more. So I think drawing it would be good. Even if it's a terrible drawing and you don't know what it is when you go back to look at it, just the act of drawing it is going to help you. But anyways, you draw it, and then you try to summarize it yourself. Right, so you read the paragraph and you say atrial systole, active ventricular filling, the atria contract, blah, 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 blah. So see if you can look at your drawing and see that happening, right? Put those words into your drawing. Use, use your own words to describe what's happening in your pictures, as long as, they're accurate. So that's one thing that you could do from page 688. 689 looks completely overwhelming, and it is. But it's really cool at the same time. If you look at it piece by piece by piece. So we'll start, this is where I should have made my little webcam video a little more high-tech. Anyways, so this top part is your EKG. Now remember, EKG is just your depolarization. It's not your contractions. Your contractions you're going to see down here as the pressure is building. That's going to show you the contractions. So you see your P wave, your QRS, and your T wave through. Well, what's actually happening, sorry, it's your image, what's actually happening during your P wave, you just go down the chart, and you'll see what's happening here. What's happening here is your semilunar valves are open, diastolic pressure is falling, your AV valves are open at that point, because that's just that's the squeezing of the sponge, as I mentioned, right? That little first phase. And we have a couple terms down here, end diastolic volume, That's kind of the maximum amount of blood that your ventricles can hold. So that AGV is relatively high at that point. And your first heart sound hasn't quite happened yet. Because again, with that P wave, that's just the ringing of the sponge that's happening. Just a squeezing down of those atrium. Then you have your QRS. Your QRS is when your ventricles begin to depolarize, and that's when your semilunar valves open just towards the end of that. As you look at your little chart here, that's what's happening here, and so on and so forth. So what you really have to do is sit down at this chart and dissect it. You have to pull it apart and see what's happening when and try to make sense of it. So go back and re-listen to some of my videos, or go back and listen to the Integrity. I'm going to post some other videos that summarize the cardiac cycle for you to help put it all together. It's very complex, but it's very cool once you understand how it all works. Very, very cool. So what else do we have to talk about here? We talked about heart sounds already, the lub and the dub, right? Lub, dub, did that. We've not talked about arterial pressure. So mean arterial pressure, or MAP, is the pressure that is kind of established throughout your arteries at peak contraction time. So the mean arterial pressure is actually the average of our systolic and our diastolic. So the systolic is when you're at rest, or when your heart's not contracting, and then the diastolic is when it is contracting. So did I mix that up? I always mix those up for some reason. I think I got them right. So your mean arterial pressure is really just a measurement that's given. It should be around 100. So that's kind of why everyone says 120/80 is 120/80 is your good blood pressure. You get a couple different terms brought in here. One's cardiac output. Cardiac output is exactly as it sounds. It's the amount of blood that's actually pumping out of your heart in a given amount of time, right? So it's like volume over time, and usually it's given by heart rate times stroke volume. My battery's going to die here, sorry. Heart rate and stroke volume. Stroke volume is the actual amount of blood with every contraction. And then you have peripheral resistance put in there, PR. Peripheral resistance is how narrow your arteries are, how long your arteries are, how much plaque is in your arteries, and all that kind of bad stuff. So you want your resistance to be as low as possible so your cardiac output can be as high as possible. This is why athletes who train and who eat a healthy diet and who have good genetics can go out and run and have a completely active day and then get up and do it again tomorrow, whereas people that are less fit can maybe push themselves through it for a day, but then the next day they're hurting, right? Because their blood wasn't pumping efficiently, so the lactic acid built up and blah, blah, blah. So some terms in there, and don't be confused by the math. On any test or quiz, any math that I give is going to be super simple, if any. What's really important here are those factors. That's on page 692. It's really important. This might be another one where you make a bunch of note cards or Post-its and see if you can create this graphic organizer again. It's all things that will change your mean arterial pressure. This is all things that will increase your mean arterial pressure. So it's important to understand how stroke volume, cardiac output, and peripheral resistance will overall affect your pressure. Then you get into some regulation. I already talked about that a little bit, how it's mostly sympathetic. And then there's a little bit on the heart and homeostasis with in terms of blood pressure. And that's done through baroreceptors as well as chemoreceptors with carbon dioxide, measuring pH levels. Carbon dioxide and pH are strongly linked, and we'll look at that pretty much throughout the semester, really. But there's some great diagrams there, 696 and 697. You can flowchart these out, actually take a sheet of paper and recreate it, and that way you can trace it and retrace it and retrace it and kind of understand how homeostasis is affected and the cause and effect relationships there. There's also a big section on MI, right, on myocardial infarction, heart attacks. So make sure that you're familiar with all of the causes and effects related to heart attacks, as well as aging on the heart. Please let me know if you have any questions on Chapter 20. It's pretty straightforward. The physiology starts in the next chapter. Chapter 21 is very physiology heavy. This is very anatomy heavy. So keep up the hard work. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.